Hey everyone, I'm ready to go ahead and move on to the next assignment. This is the weekly assignment. I've got some more work that I want you to do in R just to get a feel for some additional commands. We're getting kind of toward the end of the work that we're going to do in R. Next week, the foreman text talks about doing some of the things he's talked about, forecasting and the like in R, and we'll take a look at that. But this is pretty much going to be the end of it. And but I do want you to see some additional stuff now that we've loaded data in R. What can you do with it? So we'll go ahead and go through that. So now that we have the data file, you were loaded a data file for last week, and now that you have that data file, what can you do with the data that's in that data file? How can you make some sense out of what's in that data file, or how do you even access it? So there are so many ways to do this in R, and there are so many ways to be able to manipulate the data and do things with it in R, and it's far more than we're ever going to have time to cover. So what I want to do is just go ahead and give you one example of how you can bring a data file in, access some of the fields in your data file to isolate records and actually do things with those records. Here's an example. First thing we want to know is when we downloaded the file, we actually uploaded the file into R, it had four columns and 42 rows. One of those rows I think is a header. And it is called sales for 2016. That is the name of the file. One of the fields in that file is called just sales, capital sales. And what if we wanted to isolate just that field or just one of the entries in that field? We would need to be able to actually isolate them. This is one method for being able to do this. I'm sure there are many, many others. To first of all specify the file name and then specify the field name and separate those by a $sign. So you can see in this example, sales for 2016 is the file name. It is separated by a $sign followed by the word sales, which is the field name. So I could actually dump out all of the values for sales out of this file and display them or put them into a calculation of some sort. And this is how I would isolate that file. So file name first and then field name second, separated by a $sign. And here's an example of a command. Sum is where we sum up everything that's in a particular column or a particular vector or whatever. And we could say sum sales for 2016, and the column that we want to sum up is sales. And that's how we would submit that to R, and it would return back to us the value of all of the fields added up in that particular file. So what else can we do? Well, before we do that, let's talk about data types. Up until last week, I had you working in one single data type, and that was a vector. And a vector is a 1 by X array. It's like 1 by 10 or 1 by 50 or 1 by 1,000. It's just basically a row of data points or numbers or characters or whatever it is you want to put in there. It could be, names, whatever you want. And so that's a single array. But what if we have, like we do in our data file that we loaded last week, what if we have two dimensions? We have 4 columns and 42 rows. That becomes a matrix. And you can create a matrix and you can actually populate data into that matrix. We're not going to do a lot with matrix. In fact, we're not going to do anything with matrices. And we're also not going to do much with lists. Lists are multi-dimensional data sets that actually can have lists within them. They allow for great flexibility, but we're not going to do much with those either. The one other data set that we're actually going to look at, or data type that we're going to look at, is a data frame. A data frame is what we get when we load data either from Excel or from a CSV file. So if we dump something out of Excel and we want to load it into R, it is going to load in as a data frame, and that allows us to do a whole bunch of stuff on it. I will have you note that the loader in RStudio loads data as table_df. That's basically TBL_data frame format. That is very close to a data frame format, but there are some subtle differences. And at some point in time, you may run into a situation where if it's in TBL_df format, it isn't going to work with what you want to do because it needs to be in a true data frame format. And there are ways to convert TBL_df formats to data frames, but not necessarily for our work today. So let's take our file, the file that we loaded, the sales for 2016, and let's see if we can't isolate a subset of that file. What if we wanted just part of the file? Because a lot of times when we load data into R or we load data into some other analysis tool, we really don't want to use all the file, or we want to clean the file up. So there's a couple ways we can do that. We can create subsets using commands. Subsetting is also done using a combination of functions and square brackets, and I'll show you examples of that. If we look at an example, we say sales for 2016. we're going to go ahead and if we actually do that command, and right now notice that there's a typo in that. There's two typos in it actually. Sales should be, no, sales actually, that's fine. Sales should be uppercase, but there should be an underscore here. That will actually throw you an error. So I just missed that underscore. But if you go ahead and type out the name of the file and hit return, what that's going to return to you is all of the elements in the file. It just lists out the file, unless the file is huge, and then it will list out the first few rows of the file. But what if I wanted to see just the customer and sales columns? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to isolate out the customer and sales columns. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to type in sales for 2016. That's our file name. And then I'm going to use a combination of functions. C is a function. Remember, that's combine. Combine combines the data items that we have that follow it into a single vector, or a single, in this case, data frame. And I'm now also isolating it with square brackets, which basically means take this file and subject it to this for every single record that's in this file. And what I'm going to get is I'm going to get, instead of seeing all four of the columns that are in sales for 2016, I'm going to get a new matrix, or new data frame, I should say, that has just customer and sales in it. Let's go ahead and see an example of that in R. So I put together this script, and this is kind of some of what we've talked about so far. I'll go through the parts that we've talked about so far and then show you how those work, and then we'll go back to the PowerPoint presentation. The first one is if I just type in sales for 2016, it's going to give me the first few rows of my file. And my file is long enough that it's going to just truncate it after the 10th row, but it gives me the name, customer name, gives me sales, Christmas, value, and then it also gives me the state of residence. So now what I want to do is I want to actually get a sum on this. So I am going to take my file and I'm going to isolate out just the sales column. So this is how I would do that. Sales for 2016. Remember, it's separated by a $sign, and then it's followed by the field sales. And I can go ahead and run the function sum on that. And it gives me a value of 18,304.09. That is the total sales, this total sales column, all summed up at the end. Then I'm going to isolate the two columns, both customer and sales, and I'm going to put them in a different data frame. So first thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and isolate out those two columns. And it gives me, again, the first 10 rows, but it only this time included the customer name and their sales amount. That's great. That's sort of a way for me to verify that it actually worked. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to dump it into something called partial file. And I have now just populated a data frame called partial file with the full contents of customer and sales columns in this file, and I can see it now down here called partial file. So this is one of the data files that is, or data frames, that is now available to me to be able to use and work with and do whatever I want with. Okay, let's go back into the PowerPoint and continue our discussion. All right, so what else can we do? Well, now I've got this data file, and I'm interested in isolating out records that are greater than $500. So what I'm looking for really is customers who spent more than $500, or at least $500, from January 1st to November 30th. And so I want R to actually help me isolate those records out and then tell me who they are. And then I also want to get a total for their sales. So we use a similar bracketed command, but we build in some logic. So the logic piece that we have to build in is sales has got to be greater than or equal to $500. And we're going to put that into a new variable. We'll total up the column, and we'll look at the format of the commands. So here's the command, actually. We'll see that first in the PowerPoint presentation. I've created a data frame called large.sales. Into it, I'm going to put sales for 2016. That's my file name. Okay. And inside the brackets now, I'm going to isolate out the column that I want. I also have to specify the file name here. So I'm specifying the file name twice. It's specified here. It's also specified here, but this one is allowing me now to drill down into just the sales column. Okay. Here's where I apply my logic. This field has to be greater than or equal to 500, and if it is, grab the entire record and drop it into, actually that's not quite true, grab two of the fields from the record and drop it into large sales. So let's walk through that again. Large sales is my new data frame. I'm going to set it equal to the file name sales for 2016, then the field name. When the field name is greater than 500, I'm going to combine customer and sales and make that a new record in my new data frame. Okay, so it's going to give me a list of customers and their sales when they spent at least $500. And this list is dropped, as I said, into large.sales, which becomes another data frame, which we can then use in our workspace. So let me go back to our studio and show you how that works. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get the large sales records. And this is the same command, large sales, set equal to sales for 2016, isolating the field where it's greater than $500, and we're going to grab the customer and sales. Go ahead and run that. And we've just now populated large sales, which is a data frame that shows up down here as another data frame that we can use for our manipulation, which is a good thing because we're going to need it. The next thing I'm going to do is show me large sales. Well, there are my large sales. And it shows me the entire file because there's only 13 records where the sales amount was over $500. I asked R to give me the name, and I asked for the sales amount. And so I got both. Now I'm going to go ahead and add up, well, how much do these guys spend? What's the total value of these big spenders? So I can do the sum command, and the sum command will give me a value of $10,905.77. Okay? So that was how I was able to add in some logic, isolate out some records, isolate out some columns, and get some real use out of the values that I have here. Going back to PowerPoint, let's talk a little bit about matching. So matching values. It makes total sense that you can use things like equals, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, all these are numerical matching values. So just like in the case that I used before, I had greater than or equal to, I was able to take a numeric value and set it equal to or greater than some number value. That's all great, okay? But how do we match on character strings? Well, there's two things that you need to use. If you're going to match a character string, one that's not numeric, you're going to need to use the double equal sign and the double quotes. For example, if I wanted to pull out in my data set, remember I had a state variable there too, state of residence is one of my columns. And if I wanted to pull out all of the records where that state of residence was equal to Washington, I would use the double equals because it's a character field, and I would put the value in quotes. And that's how we were going to isolate the records for a specific state. So last week, I had you manually isolate out a group of records from a geographic area. I gave you each your own geographic area, and I had you pull the records out of the Excel spreadsheet and put them into a different Excel spreadsheet. But we actually didn't need to do that. We could have just used R to do it for us. And here's how we would have done that. I could have had you, if you were assigned to Washington State, I could have had you set up a variable called Washington State Sales. You would have set that equal to, this is your file name, sales for 2016. This is your file name and your field name. Now your field name is state of residence. I changed it from sales to state of residence, and because it has spaces in it, I put it in single quotes. So where state of residence is equal to the value capital WA for Washington, then combine what's in customer, what's in sales, and what's in Christmas, and make that a new record in this data frame, Washington State Sales. Okay, so I could have dumped everything from Washington or Oregon or Idaho. The only thing I would have to change here is this designation, and you could have done it directly from R. So what we would do then is it would create a new data frame, but it would only have those from Washington State. And then if you want to do a total sales for Washington State, you could do sum, just like we've done in the past, sum Washington State Sales, $sales. Okay, this is our new data frame name, so we can use it. And we can actually pull the sales column out of it, and we can use that combination to actually sum up what was the sales for Washington State. And the other thing I asked you to do is ask you to do a linear model for your new data set. Well, you could have done that this way. This should actually be a small m. PowerPoint always converts everything to capitals, so it should be a small m. So this is LM, and it's Christmas versus sales, where our data set now is equal to Washington State Sales, because we just isolated that out. Let's go ahead and take a look at how that works in R. So here we are. Can we isolate those customers from Washington State and track their name, sales, and what they spent at Christmas? So here is the effort to populate that Washington State sales data frame. Okay, we were able to grab everything that was from Washington, and I'll go ahead and show you what's in that frame. We have all of the customers, what their sales were, and what their Christmas value was. And I didn't put the state of residence in there because we already filtered them out and they're just Washington State. Now let's go ahead and add them up. What did Washington State spend at Christmas time? Actually, I changed the value to Christmas instead of sales. So what did they spend at Christmas time? They spent $757.23.75. Okay. Well, the next thing I want to see is what's the next thing I want to see is if across these 7 records I can use sales as a predictor for Christmas. So that would be to again run the linear model, and it gives me my coefficients. My intercept is pretty small, and my sales is kind of small. Not probably the most dependable data set since it's only being built on these 7 records, but at least you can see how it can be done. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and plot these data points. I'll run my plot command, and it shows me that for my 7 data points, actually look like I got a pretty linear line here. If there were more data sets or more data points and they looked this good, you probably would get a pretty good linear model. So what do I want you to do for this week? For this week, I want you to create a new data frame that contains all of the records where the customer spent less than $250 at Christmas time. That's going to be a pretty big data frame relative to our data file because most of them did spend less than $250 at Christmas time. I want you to transfer the columns customer, Christmas, and state of residence to a new data frame. You name it whatever you want to name it. Okay. Then I want you to create 3 new data frames. Okay. One of them is going to have Washington customers, one of them is going to have Oregon customers, and one of them is going to have Idaho customers. So you'll create 3 new data frames. You can name those as you wish. I want you to run a sum command on all 3 of your new data frames, all to answer 2 questions actually. Which state was the highest and which state was the lowest? So go ahead and run those commands. If you can, capture those and put those into a Word doc and send those off to me, or do a screen capture and send that off to me, and that will be your submission for this 8th week for your R weekly exercise. If you have any questions, let me know. I know this is fairly new stuff. I'm going to run through one more time my commands so that you see it kind of in the video, and we'll take a look one more time in RStudio so I can hopefully allow that to answer some questions. Back to RStudio. We're going to start everything over from the top. Okay. Remember, the first thing we did is we looked at the records in our data file, and it only gives us the first 10. Then the next thing we did is we ran a sum. I wanted to know, first of all, I want to isolate out my field sales in my sales for 2016, and I want to add it up. It gives me the total of 18,304.09. The next thing I'm going to do is create a new data frame that is actually going to have just customer and sales in it. And it shows it to me on the screen. But what I really want to do is I really want to put this into a file or a new data frame called partial file. So I'll go ahead and do that. And it populates partial file. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to isolate all of the records from our set that where the customer spent more than $500 between the first of the year and the last of November. And I'm going to build that out of just the customer name and their sales amount. So we'll go ahead and run that. There it is. It's run. It's done. I've populated large sales, but how do I know what's in it? I can actually take a look at large sales, and it will show me these are my big spenders. Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and add up how much did these big spenders spend? $10,905.77. So now what I want to do is I want to isolate out all of my records where the customer is from Washington State. And I'm going to pull out customer, sales, and Christmas for every Washington State customer and put those into a data frame called Washington State Sales. So go ahead and hit run on that. It's populated Washington State Sales. Let's see what's in there. There are my 7 records from Washington State, along with the customer name, the sales amount, and the Christmas amount. The next thing I'm going to do from that is I'm going to add up how much did they spend on Washington State. I'm giving you part of your answer here, $757.23.75. Then I'll run a linear model just on the Washington state data. I get my coefficients. This is my intercept. This is the point where sales is 0. This is where the intercept starts. And then for each unit of sales, I add up 2.5 times e to the first. So it's going to be a pretty small amount. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run a plot. So I'll go ahead and run that, and it gives me my plot. Doesn't seem like that updated, but it did. There's actually 2 plots there now. And that's what you have to do in order to get the answer that you need to get. You need to go ahead and create a couple of new data frames, one for Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, and go ahead and run your sum commands. Tell me how much or who was the biggest spender of the 3 states. All right, once again, if you have any questions, send me an email. All right, thanks.